Number one Ibble Dibble here. Hello, friends, and welcome to part 4 of Meghan in Vogue. Meghan's guest editor letter. Chapter 7. SOS from Soho House. It was in early January, on a cold and blustery London day, that I sat down for a cup of tea with British Vogue's editor-in-chief, Edward Enninful. Though we have several mutual friends, our first encounter had been years in the making, the impetus for which was my asking him to support an organization I strongly believe in called SmartWorks. I will try to not just be a grammarian, although sometimes I can't help it because Meghan's writing is so terrible. But obviously, though is a contrast word. It would work with a though and pair. Though we have many mutual friends and our meeting was many years in the making, the impetus for it was X. The writing in Vogue is mostly terrible. Edward's letter was terrible too, but Meghan brings it to a new low. I wonder if anyone was tasked with editing her at all, or if she had final approval and just rejected everyone's edits. What evolved over the next hour was a promising powwow of two like-minded thinkers who have much in common, including our love of writing. Can you imagine that conversation? Yeah, I love writing. I write a letter every month. And I wrote a blog for years. Over a steaming cup of mint tea, we teased through how one can shine light in a world filled with seemingly daily darkness. Lofty? Of course. Worth it? Without question. Within hours of our meeting's end, we were already texting one another, philosophizing about how to communicate this shared understanding. What shared understanding? And the lens through which we see the world. I don't think anyone's confused about the lens through which you see the world. You're both social climbing, race baiting one percenters. Do you mean you mutually agreed to use this September issue as an opportunity to self-mythologize yet again? But this time trading tips on how to do so more believably? How to pivot from a perspective of frustration to one of optimism. Again, I don't think anybody is confused about this. It seems like a combination of determination and Machiavellianism with you two. But let's say I never acquainted myself with either of your past scandals. It's pretty easy to imagine how one percenters with very glamorous roles in public life can approach each day with optimism. So I asked the question. Actually, I typed and deleted the question several times until I built up the courage to ask the question in question. I had in mind the question in question, so I asked the ask. In due course, of course. Edward, instead of doing the cover, would you be open to me guest editing your September issue? Mind you, I know how important the September issue is for the fashion industry. I realize the reach, and I see the opportunity to be a part of fashion's push for something greater, kinder, more impactful. But I am also a little nervous to be boldly asking the editor-in-chief, whom I've only just met, to take a chance on me. I sent the text. So it's early January. We know Meghan has decided to leave the royal family. She has decided to threaten Harry with suicide to get him to agree to it. And the Dear Daddy letter is breaking around the time she's having these initial text conversations with Edward. I find it so odd that she felt her best chance at a popular rebrand and jump to America would be a full September issue of high horse condescension from her. Again, people subscribe to Vogue for fashion. I'm not terribly interested in primatology, for example. Meghan would have retained more fans if she had retained more mystery. She really should have gone the Kate route. A demure, casual cover, and just a couple milquetoast pages on thankfulness. Thinking she could simultaneously use Vogue's clout to network with actual change makers and A-listers, and thinking she could manipulate us on the mass scale, convince Vogue's 200,000 readers and additional newsstand purchasers that she is smart, well-connected, marketable, she's a good writer. I think it was a big mistake. The ellipsis, the ... that inspires the greatest practice of patience in this digital era. That's the greatest challenge to your patience you face? And you have the audacity to put an article about meditation in this magazine? Is that what you visualize in your head while you breathe deeply in and out? An ellipsis? disappearing? And then it appeared, EE's reply. Yes, I would love for you to be my guest editor. Sitting on my sofa at home, two dogs nestled across me, I quietly celebrated when the words appeared on my screen. I have to give it to you, it was a coup, a real lapse in judgment on his part. Eddie is really a gambler, huh? He could have said, why don't we give you a cover and a little article about your secondhand business clothes charity? And then 2 months later, a little essay and announce a fundraiser, collaborate on a tea party and gauge the reaction and go from there. No, Edward went with this ridiculous proposal. Within a week, Edward and I were having our regular meetings, discussing goals, ideas, who would feature on the cover, all while I was undergoing a crash course in editorial lingo. The well, meaning the inner crux of the book, and acronyms aplenty. FOB, which I took a stab at being front of book. I was trying to blend in, to keep up with the pace of these seasoned professionals, and to learn as much as I could as quickly as possible. There were facets I felt were of prime importance to include within this issue, elements that would hopefully set the tone, knowing this issue hits stands in August, just as readers gear up for the September fashion shows, where judgment can become clouded and focus skewed toward the superficial. Facets of what, elements of what, fashion is essentially superficial. The September issue has traditionally been about school clothes and back to work clothes. People who buy Vogue are probably still figuring out how much appearances and consumerism compose their identity, or they need to know how to look current and presentable for social or professional reasons, or they appreciate the artistry of the magazine, which obviously you don't grasp. I think the video I have with the most views is an exploration of how little you grasp about how photo shoots work. Stop insulting them. And stop pretending the Vogue staff didn't dumb it down for you. We know they did. Stop pretending you can't just ask someone what they mean. Why is everything so hard for Meghan? Is it her pride? Jargon doesn't make you sound smart. Being smart makes you sound smart. And if you're not smart, that's fine too. Duchesses don't have to be smart. And if it's an act, why does she think it will be charming and relatable? As a narcissist, does she think she's the smartest person in any given room? And she gets everything she wants because the rest of us are too nice and too stupid? So the best way to sell to us would be pretending to be nice and stupid. People want to relate to class, poise, and magnanimity in a duchess. Meghan, they don't want to think of you as a 40-year-old woman with the maturity of a schoolgirl who refuses to get her dictionary off the top shelf. Why do you keep forcing them to? I wish just once Meghan or Harry would get a brutal editor who just slashed up shit like this and said, oh, yeah, no, ignorance is not on brand. I had read a book many moons ago called The Four-Chambered Heart by Anais Nin, which had a quote that has always resonated with me. I must be a mermaid, Rango. I have no fear of depths and a great fear of shallow living. For this issue, I imagined, why would we swim in the shallow end of the pool when we could go to the deep end? A metaphor for life as well as for this issue. Let's be braver. Let's go a bit deeper. This really almost broke me. That quote is so stupid. It really doesn't matter who you attribute it to. You could tell me it was Kafka or Hemingway, and for the first time in a long time, I'd think less of them. But for those of you unfamiliar, Anais Nin can barely be called a writer. She was a diarist, a very wealthy socialite who loved writing and loved the literary scene and slept with and sponsored financially dozens of people in it. Her own writing is extensive, pretty terrible. Now and at the time it was roundly mocked. She did enjoy a glimmer of respect as an elderly woman. In the 1970s, her work was revisited and assigned some value as feminist erotica, but that's about it. If you've ever seen the 70s, 80s porn series Emmanuelle, Anais Nin is the literary equivalent. Deep is not a word I would use to describe it unless I were making some kind of pun. And the fact that Meghan thought it was okay to not only reference it, but do so in a reverential tone It's shocking to me. For those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, here's an excerpt. At dawn, not content with the life transfusion through cat guts, filled with the sap of his voice which had passed into their veins, at dawn the women wanted to lay hands upon his body. But at dawn, Rango swung his guitar over his shoulder and walked away. Will you be here tomorrow, Rango? Tomorrow he might be playing and singing to his black horse's philosophically swaying tail on the road to the south of France. Toward the ambulant Rango, Duna learned to catch all that his music contained, and her ear detected the presence of this unattainable island of joy which she pursued, which she had glimpsed at the party she had never attended but watched from her window as a girl. And like some lost voyager in a desert, she leaned more and more eagerly toward this musical mirage, the pleasure never known to her, the pleasure of freedom. Rango, would you play once for my dancing? She asked softly and fervently, and Rango stopped on his way out to bow to her, a bow of consent which took centuries of stylization and nobility of bearing to create, a bow indicating the largesse of gesture of a man who had never been bound. Duna, you're taking me to the bottom of the sea to live, like a real mermaid. I must be a mermaid, Rango. I have no fear of depths and a great fear of shallow living. But you, poor Rango, you're from the mountain. Water is not your element. You won't be happy. Men from the mountains always dream of the sea, and above all things, I love to travel. Where are we sailing now? As he said this, another barge passed up the river close to theirs. The whole barge heaved, the large wooden frame cracked like a giant's bones. Rango lay down and said, "We're navigating. We're out of the world. All the dangers are outside, out in the world. All the dangers. Dangers to the love they believed as all lovers believe, came from the outside, from the world, never suspecting the seed of death of love might lie within themselves. I want to keep you here, Juna. I would like it if you never left the barge. I wouldn't mind staying here, if it were not for Zora. Zora, awaiting food, awaiting medicines, awaiting Rango to light the fire. Rango, when you kiss me, the barge rocks." This antiquated PG-13 trash mermaid reference predates all the comparisons Meghan later made between herself and Hans Christian Andersen or Disney's Little Mermaid. I think someone at the palace read this and told her, "You can't say this." Royal duchesses, in particular pregnant royal duchesses, writing in British Vogue, signing their letter, Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex, cannot associate themselves with widely recognizable vintage smut. Meghan is quite provincial, and I imagine she thought she was making a sophisticated European reference, and was probably embarrassed when she realized what other people thought of this author, and changed her mermaid story to the fairy tale to pretend her point was something about oppression. And every time she draws that comparison between herself and the Little Mermaid, she really plays it as young and innocent as possible.
Gosh, it must have been years ago. We were sitting in Nottingham. I was sitting in Nottingham Cottage, and The Little Mermaid came on. Now, who as an adult really watches The Little Mermaid? But it came on. I was like, well, I'm just here all the time, so may as well watch this. And I went, oh my God. She falls in love with the prince, and because of that, she has to lose her voice. But by the end, she gets her voice back.
Gets her voice back. And this is what happened here. You feel like you got your voice back.
In fact, her original mermaid story wasn't about real oppression, it was about bondage as a game, physical and emotional domination as sexy exploit. Although terribly executed, this is how Anais Nin described her plan in writing The Four-Chambered Heart. One of the themes of psychoanalysis had always appealed to me, the concept that we participate in our destructive experiences, that we are by our very temperaments and unconscious drives often allied with our tormentors, our jailers, figuratively speaking, our tyrants. The concept that Rango could very well be in accord, unconsciously, with his wife's particular form of tyranny, hypochondria, never occurred in the diary, but it occurred to me first as a new concept which certainly could be applied to them in a fictionalized way. The psychological reality is that when we feel unequal or unwilling to confront a challenging experience, we take refuge in what the other demands of us. Rango, unable to face the discipline demanded of political commitments, used the illness of his wife as an alibi. Thus, he was, unconsciously, at one with her aims, which were to keep him through dependency and need. I had also studied the psychological, subtle paradox that the irrational person often acquired greater power over another than the rational one, because the irrational mind cannot be detected or influenced or defeated when it's acting out an irrational need of our own that we do not wish to confront. It has what you might describe as a subliminal influence. It was like an undetected malady which affected the couple. As a victimized, devoted husband, he could still admire himself. As a political influence, he knew, unconsciously, he could not achieve anything. I had often seen couples in which the emotional person dominated the so-called logical or rational person because the logical person did not understand the irrational behavior and therefore could not grapple with it. So which mermaid story do you think Meghan the narcissist really believes describes her relationship with Harry? That's what Edward and I have aimed to achieve. An issue of both substance and levity. It is, after all, the September issue of British Vogue, and an opportunity to further diversify what that typically represents. Throughout these pages, you'll find Commonwealth designers, ethical and sustainable brands, as well as features with designers not about clothes, but about heritage, history, and heirloom. Why? Not just why are you chatting with fashion designers about things they may not have the strongest grasp of, but why, in an issue about new modern perspectives on forcing change, are you hung up on heritage and heirloom? This little narc symptom of Megan's pops up from time to time. She always wants to hear people's whole life stories and family histories so she can claim whatever pieces of them she thinks are flattering as her own. She does this in everyday conversation, like when she told Ziwe she was 43% Nigerian, and she does it in her everyday habits, always wearing Trevor's bracelet and Diana's watch. It's because she and all other narcissists are really void of any sentimentality, but they understand how much it motivates normal people. So they want to steal all their gems, literal and figurative, and armor themselves with them like little Nietzschean fascists, verbally and visually referencing an entirely manufactured lineage of superiority stretching back into time immemorial that they hope will be so impressive nobody would ever question. You'll also find a beauty section that puts its energy towards internal beauty, celebrating the power of breathing and meditation, and a favorite workout that urges you to use your heart as much as your core. That does not read as expansive and inclusive. Everyone knows how to find a free yoga workout on YouTube or download a meditation app to their phone. It sounds like classic celebrity gatekeeping, and a big part of the reason people pay so much money to maintain subscriptions with legacy magazines like Vogue is getting the names and numbers of the top dentists, injectors, personal trainers, dietitians, and so on. Probably very few people purchasing Vogue care about whether you prefer Kundalini or Vinyasa. They want to know what brand and style number of false eyelash your makeup artist uses, which salon in London you visit for Japanese straightening. They don't want to hear a chopped and twisted duchess with a limitless budget telling them they should just accept being ugly more happily. As you flip the pages, you'll find familiar faces and names that I hope you get to know a bit better, a bit more deeply even. And there are less familiar names that you may want to know, such as the women of Luminary Bakery and Tessa Clark, co-founder of food sharing app Olio, whom I met with discreetly last year. Megan loves the word discreet. You don't need to meet with the founder of a food sharing app discreetly. In fact, if you really wanted to give her support, you would meet her at lunchtime in the Fortnum and Mason tea room. Megan is always trying to convince rich people that as a fellow rich person, she respects their privacy when she never does. You're not fooling anyone. No one thinks you'll keep their secrets, and that's probably why you have no friends. There are inspiring reads from Brene Brown and Jamila Jamil. You'll also find a very special piece with Dr. Jane Goodall, interviewed by my husband, and a candid and heartfelt conversation between myself and the extraordinary Michelle Obama. But more than anything, this issue is about the power of the collective. In identifying our personal strengths, it is anchored in the knowledge that we are even stronger together. You will find that spirit of inclusivity on the cover, diverse portraiture of women of varying age, color, creed, nationality, and life experience, and of unquestionable inspiration. Wow, those really sound like the words of a true friend inviting me into their life, not like a marketing team's breakdown of Target demos at all. Some I've had the pleasure of meeting and enlisted personally for this issue. Others I've admired from afar for their commitment to a cause, their fearlessness in breaking barriers, or what they represent simply by being. I really take umbrage with this notion, what they represent simply by being. It's very similar to how she later said in Oprah, the British press and people hated her simply because she was breathing. It's such a strange disavowal of agency. Again, I think this is deeply rooted in her narcissism. She expects her refusal to ever be held accountable for her actions to be interpreted as chivalric, not irresponsible. These are our forces for change. And among all of these strong women on the cover, a mirror, a space for you, the reader, to see yourself, because you too are part of this collective. No thanks. Hard pass. RSVP, regrettably, I cannot attend. There is one caveat for you to remember. This is a magazine. It's still a business after all. I share that to manage expectations for you. There will be advertising sections that are requisite for every issue. No shit. Firstly, don't insult Vogue's readership. Odds are 99.999% of them understand how capitalism works. Secondly, stop pretending you're above money, you crass materialist. So while I feel confident that you'll feel my thumbprint on most pages, please know that there are elements that just come with the territory. Don't forget, anything you like was all my idea. Anything you don't was all Edward's. The overall sentiment I hope you'll find, however, will be one of positivity, kindness, humor, and inclusivity. I was about 5 months pregnant when this process began, and by the time you hold this issue in your hands, my husband and I will be holding our 3-month-old baby boy in hours. It's a very special time for me personally on so many levels. Levels, layers, facets, elements, nuances. For an executive, it must be really difficult to be pitched by Meghan. When do you get up and walk out? When she hits you with one of these, or when she says, set the table? Working with Edward and his team, both during my pregnancy and my maternity leave, has played no small part in that joy. It has been a privilege to be welcomed and supported by this amazing team. To Edward, thank you for entrusting me with this. I am deeply honored. To the women who have taken my aspirations for this issue and brought them to life by being a part of this time capsule, both on the cover and in book, I am so grateful. You are inspirations to me, and I'm humbled by your support. That's too funny, as if Meghan is ever humbled by anything. And to you, the reader, thank you, and I hope you enjoy. Meghan, Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. And don't you forget it. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you for listening. Toodles. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.